when I was in Washington dealing with this weed thing, I talked to John Garamendi, and he about bit my head off because he said, well, I put a water hyacinth bill before the state back in 74, 76, and nobody did anything. And so until you read that bill, I'm not talking to you. So I have looked at his bill. It's basically could have been written yesterday. The problem is that was 40 years ago. This problem has been around for 40 years. I understand that the seed population in the Delta is like enough to basically be around even after the thermonuclear bomb goes off. So the problem is that we've been screwing around with this for 40 plus years. If you do any adaptive management and habitat, and you haven't taken into account this weed problem, all you're going to do is create a very nice habitat for all of these very nice invasive weeds. And so this is the kind of thing that the state owns certain lands in the Delta. They could have been early implementing some of this habitat, and that way they could also have learned a little bit about adaptive management on these properties. But we haven't done that yet. So I guess it boils down to trust. Everybody says, well, just trust us. We've got all this science. We've got all this knowledge. When we do these things, we will take care of you. And I guess the folks in the Delta are saying, we haven't seen that in the past. We haven't seen either the resources haven't been made available to deal with the weeds, or they haven't been made when the state owns certain islands. That their idea of adaptive management was to basically say that is now habitat and to walk away from it. And that doesn't work. So I guess it boils down to we're going to pass this and we're going to send this stuff up there. But the folks in the Delta, actions speak louder than words to them. And they want to see something before they trust you.
Yeah. But in part, if I hear you, I think what the suggestion I have is that we perhaps modify our comment letter to provide, call out the importance of attending to the issue of invasive weeds, and emphasize that it ought to get some priority in pilot projects as they begin to implement things.
This is just an example,
yeah.
and we are working on a pilot program to do this. But
great, thanks.
Patrick. On that, I think I staffed John Garamendi on that bill. So, but later on, I was involved in many others in the water hyacinth control. Nobody quite owns the problem because it pops up throughout the Delta, and the comments that here we might make sure that to the degree that BDCP and projects associated with that or mitigation associated with that ought to invest some effort and expense to control it is called for, and I agree with Larry. The problem's larger. The Delta Plan, our Delta Plan, acknowledges that. I think boating and waterways had responsibility for it because it's a recreation impact when you have a lot of weeds clogging marinas. And the Department of Boating and Waterways has had a dedicated source of funds, so they had some money to use it without tapping general fund money or contractors' money. But what Lucas mentioned is that the long-term maintenance and repetitive costs of a program over such an extensive area is a big challenge. So individual communities or farmers or marinas or the ports deal with it as best they can. Whether there's a more systemic view of how we might engage it, I don't know. I think it's a good subject for the council and for the Delta plan as we go forward. BDCP is an important part of it, but just a part.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Phil?
Dan, thank you for the presentation. I support the draft resolution the staff's prepared, but I want to make a couple suggestions on the cover letter that which is attachment 4. And my suggestions are directed to pages 2 and 3 of the letter, which is after the preamble, which I like. I think it was entirely appropriate to point out where BDCP's already adjusted to previous comments we've made. I think that's valuable. I think it's a good way to approach it. But something tells me that this letter has to include one additional bullet point, and just tentatively, a much stronger involvement of science. Thematically, in everything we've heard today and throughout the Delta plan, and everything we're doing on the science plan is to make that point. And in many ways, this bullet summary in the cover letter from the chair becomes the most public document. I mean, sure, we've got a 13-page or whatever it is attachment that goes with it, but it's that distillation of the overarching principles, goals, whatever they are, that seems to me to be important. So just a suggestion. I think that is entirely appropriate. It's consistent with everything they've been saying in BDCP. Is their intention. It's consistent with a statement of the governor and the secretary in 2012 about the role of science, and I think that's worth adding. A couple of other things on the captions. I think you might want to try to rethink it a little bit. The caption that says on page 2, Delta Reform Act requirements, doesn't say anything. What you've got in the cover letter, on memo rather, on page 3, the Reform Act requirements. But I think what you really mean to say is that important elements of the Delta Reform Act are appropriately part of an EIR discussion. And specifically, you had recommended on page 4 the preparation of a water balance as part of the discussion of impacts on the in-Delta users as well as others. That is also consistent with our role to promote statewide water conservation. I mean, it just take the Delta Act requirements and convert it into not a caption, but what they actually are, to have the same punch, comparable to the punch, better mitigating impacts to water quality and the unique values of the Delta, which somebody can read and get a pretty clear understanding of what's involved. Number 2, the second bullet point on page 2, improving understanding of the BDP's conservation measures 2 through 22. I think what you've said in the background memo, and I think what you mean to say here, are two basic things. You reference it. There's a need for a more refined regional strategy for BDCP's habitat restoration, which you say actually in the narrative. And secondly, can't wait, start now, which is number 6 of your key issues in the memo. I mean, Dan, this is like going to that 3-part thing you did for the Delta Science Plan, the plan, do, whatever in the hell the third one is. I mean, it's that is what we need in the cover points.
One of the pleasures of working with you, Mr. Eisenberg, is you always have suggestions about how we can make things better. I think Paul McCartney would have come into the studio with a thing he was ready to rock and roll with, and then you are, John Lennon, saying, no, let's do this, do that. That's just a great suggestion.
I'm in favor of repetition, but I'm more in favor of reducing it to understandable terms everywhere it appears, because the last bullet point you have on page 4, which is better mitigating impacts, is essentially a composition of recommendation of key concerns number 11 and number 12, and key recommendations number 3 and 8, and you shouldn't have to say the same thing all over again. So just a point on the memo. you've got the backing memo. You've got 12 key concerns and 12 key recommendations, and something tells me that they can be consolidated and to reduce the number and to make them more understandable. This is on page 1 and 2 of the staff review comment document attached.
Are there any in particular that you don't understand?
Well, it's not the understand. It's, for example, if number 6 is appropriate mitigation for potentially adverse impacts is warranted, should not be deferred to the adaptive management phase. You've essentially broken it down as, here are the things we're concerned about, here are the recommendations we make. If I were doing it, I'd say you take number 6, for example, should not be deferred. Recommendation, start habitat restoration immediately. Do not wait for the adaptive management stage. Since you've already heard from the scientist, it will take years of implementation and monitoring to draw conclusions, and delaying that simply delays any meaningful. It's just a restructuring. I'm not suggesting you remove any particular items. I don't object to them. I'm not suggesting you change any of the particular recommendations, but it's just how you order it to make it easier for a reader. And then I did. Well, I guess that's my point. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Gloria?
This is a great segue into my comments, because those questions you were asking certainly kind of reflects the complexity of the Delta ecosystem. And I don't claim to be an expert in CEQA or a legal expert and so forth. And the document, I think, is very complex, and the draft BDCP and the EIR. And so I commend staff for all the time that you have spent responding to the document. What I'd like to say basically is kind of about the process. And again, I think staff has answered those, responded and read it and provided some comments. And I think that what you presented today in terms of some of the uncertainties, hopefully when you submit the comments that DWR will respond, and hopefully some of those uncertainties can be cleared up. So Dan and Mr. Roth, I think, those uncertainties and recommendations you have should move forward, and hopefully some of those issues can be handled or improved. But I just want to kind of provide some general comments about the BDC process and what it has meant over the last 8 years. I think it has been a very transparent process. DWR and certainly the Natural Resource Agency has come before the council from time to time to bring us updates about the status of the process and to brief us on it. And so I think that has been a good deal for the council, because BDCP is important to us. And so it has been transparent. I believe it's been in process for over 8 years. And it's been developed with input from state and federal agencies as well as the science community. And it's held hundreds of public hearings to get input from stakeholders. And so I think it has been a very long and transparent process. I believe in being thorough. I believe in being comprehensive. I believe in getting information. But I think at some point a decision has to be made about BDCP. And but again, I believe a process has to happen. And so I think that once there is a decision made, hopefully, well, first of all, nothing is perfect. I mean, the Delta plan has not been perfect. And certainly once the project is approved, or that there will be some questions about it, but hopefully through adaptive management throughout later on, that some of those things can be addressed. But I just really wanted to speak to the fact that I think it has been a lengthy process, more than probably some people would have thought should have taken that long. And I want to again commend staff for responding and providing some input to the draft plan, to the draft project, as well as the EIR. And hopefully those DWR will take those comments and respond, and some of those things will be cleared up But again, I want to stress, I think the process has been transparent, it has been lengthy, and I hope at some point, I believe that some decision has to be made with BDCP. This council has made a decision about the Delta Plan moving forward, so I do want to go on record by encouraging that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. I want to make sure that the council has the opportunity to comment on this and ask questions before we open it up to public comment. And following the public comment, then we will entertain a motion that will probably begin with the staff recommended recommendations. So, are there any other comments, questions of the council members present? If not, Pat, I think I'm ready for the blue slips. Actually, I know I'm ready for the blue slips.